The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet right before something breaks. Captain Marcus Reyes, my sister's fiancé, a broad-shouldered army ranger with a handshake he'd clearly practiced, had my hand in his, polite and firm, his eyes already sliding past me toward the next person he was supposed to meet. Then his gaze snagged on my collar, where the chain around my neck had slipped loose from under my shirt during the hug my mother forced on me 20 minutes earlier. He looked at the dog tags, he looked at me, and every ounce of easy confidence drained out of his face like someone had pulled a plug. "Hold on," he said, and his voice had changed completely, gone low and careful. Are you the commander from Fallujah?" Behind him, my stepfather Gary, a man who measured worth in golf handicaps and dinner table applause, was mid-laugh at his own joke, the one where he'd just introduced me to a decorated army ranger with the words, "Don't mind her, she's the failure." The room had smirked right on cue, the way rooms full of Gary's friends always did. Nobody had smirked at Marcus's question yet. They didn't understand it was a question that was about to end the party as they knew it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon 11 years ago, in a different kind of room, where the first slight landed and nobody noticed but me. I was 22, home on leave for the first time since basic, sitting at my mother's kitchen table in my Class A uniform because I'd been told, foolishly, I see now, that people wear their achievements to family dinners. My stepfather, Gary Whitfield, a man who mistook obedience for love and volume for authority, glanced at the single ribbon on my chest and said, "That's nice, sweetheart, but Whitney got promoted to assistant manager at the Gap." My sister, Whitney, the family's golden child, a woman whose defining talent was making mediocrity sound like triumph, beamed as the table erupted into applause for a fitting room promotion, while my mother refilled everyone's wine and never once looked at me. I remember doing the math in my head, the quiet arithmetic I'd gotten so used to running, one report card ignored, one science fair trophy misplaced, one full-ride scholarship acknowledged with a shrug, and now this. I didn't say anything. I never said anything. I just filed it away, the way I filed everything away, in the ledger I never let anyone see. To understand how it came to this, you have to understand the two worlds I was living in, because by the time I was 33, they had almost nothing to do with each other anymore. In my mother's house, I was the one who went into the army, because she couldn't figure out what else to do with her life. That was the official family narrative, repeated so often it had calcified into fact. Whitney, meanwhile, was celebrated for things that would have been unremarkable from anyone else. A completed 5K, a promotion to regional coordinator, an engagement to a man in uniform whose uniform, ironically, nobody in that family understood the first thing about. Gary loved Marcus instantly and loudly, the way he loved anyone who gave him a story to tell at the club. My future son-in-law, an army ranger, a real hero, while I sat 2 feet away, an actual field-grade officer, invisible in my own family's mythology. In my other world, the real one, I was Lieutenant Colonel Dana Ashford, call sign Shadow 6, commanding officer of a Marine Special Operations Task Force that had spent the better part of 18 months rotating through Al-Anbar province during some of the ugliest urban fighting of the campaign. The men and women under my command didn't ask what my stepfather thought of me. They didn't need to. Respect, in that world, wasn't handed out at dinner tables. It was earned in briefing rooms and confirmed under fire, and once you had it, nobody bothered relitigating it. My executive officer, Major Priya Kapoor, a woman who'd flown more casualty evacuations than she could count and who trusted my judgment with her life, used to say that the quietest people in a briefing were usually the ones who'd actually been shot at. She wasn't wrong. I had learned, in that world, that authority didn't need to raise its voice. It was a lesson my family had never taught me, because in my family, love was loud, and I had simply never been loud enough to receive it. So I stopped trying to speak their language. I started speaking the other one, the language of protocol, of chain of command, of documentation that couldn't be waved away with a shrug and a refilled wine glass. If my family's currency was performance and applause, mine, I decided, would be procedure. Procedure didn't forget. Procedure didn't have selective memory. Procedure kept records. The invitation to Whitney's engagement party arrived by text message 3 weeks before the event, with a passive-aggressive line from my mother about how she hoped my schedule would finally allow me to attend, as if 18-hour operational tempo were a scheduling preference. I almost said no. I'd said no plenty of times before, and the family narrative had simply absorbed each absence as further proof of my failure to prioritize them. But something about this one was different. Whitney's fiancé was a ranger captain, currently assigned to a training command at Benning, and Priya, who still tracked personnel movements out of habit as much as necessity, mentioned over a secure line that Reyes's unit had rotated through the same AO as my task force during the Fallujah push. Different chain of command, same dirt, same nightmare month. I didn't think much of it at first. Coincidences happen in a military this size. But I filed it away, the way I filed everything. What I did next wasn't emotional. I want to be clear about that, because for years, the story my family told about me was that I ran hot, that I stormed off, that I couldn't take a joke, and none of that was ever true. What I did was methodical. I confirmed, quietly, through channels that had nothing to do with feelings, that Captain Marcus Reyes had, in fact, served as a platoon leader attached to a joint task force during the same operation my unit anchored, an operation still referenced in briefings by its classified designation, Operation Black Fog, one most people outside that world had never heard of and never would. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to manufacture anything. I simply understood, with the kind of cold clarity that used to unsettle people in briefing rooms, that if Marcus Reyes ever learned who I actually was, the truth wouldn't need my help to detonate. It would do that entirely on its own. I wore the dog tags that night. Not the ribbons, not the insignia, just the tags, tucked under a plain black dress. The way I always did when I wanted to remember something without announcing it. Some habits are armor. Some are just honesty you keep close to the skin. I told myself I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone in that house. I was lying to myself, a little, the way you do when the truth is inconvenient. My mother's enabling had a particular shape by then. She'd stopped defending Gary's comments outright, and instead retreated into a softer, more insidious kind of complicity. The, "oh, you know how he is" shrug that let cruelty pass through the room like weather nobody was responsible for. I understood, walking up that driveway, that nothing in that house was going to change on its own. Something was going to have to happen to it. The party was exactly what I expected. String lights, a rented arch, Gary in a blazer holding court near the bar, already 3 drinks into a story about Whitney's incredible new title. I found my mother first, hugged her because that was still, somehow, easier than not hugging her, and felt the dog tags slip loose from my collar in the process. I didn't notice. I was too busy doing what I always did at these events, which was making myself small enough to survive them. Gary spotted me near the dessert table 20 minutes later, and did what Gary did. Grabbed my elbow, steered me toward a knot of Whitney's friends and Marcus's family, and made the introduction that would end up, in every retelling of this story since, as the line that started it all. "And this," he announced, gesturing at me the way you'd gesture at a coat rack, "is my other daughter. Don't mind her, she's the failure." Whitney got all the ambition in this family. The laugh that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was casual, the practiced laugh of people who'd heard this joke about me a dozen times before and had simply agreed, collectively, that it was fine. Marcus Reyes extended his hand anyway, professional to the last, a soldier's manners overriding an awkward room. I shook it. and that's when he saw the tags. I watched the recognition move through him in real time, first confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. The particular fear of a junior officer realizing he has publicly misjudged a senior one. Shadow 6, he said, quiet enough that only I heard it at first, and then, louder, unable to help himself, you're the commander from Fallujah. M.A.M. You're Lieutenant Colonel Ashford. My mother's laugh caught in her throat. Gary's smile stayed frozen on his face a beat too long, the way a photograph keeps smiling long after the moment it captured has died. And Whitney, God bless her, said, "Wait, what?" into a silence that was already answering her. Marcus straightened without seeming to decide to. The way you do when your spine remembers something, before your brain catches up, full attention, chin level, the posture I'd seen 1,000 junior officers snap into in front of me without thinking about it. "Ma'am, I served under Colonel Whitmore's task force during Black Fog," he said. "We were danger close to your element during the extraction on the 11th. I read the after-action report. I've read it probably 20 times. I didn't." He stopped himself, glanced at Gary, then back at me, and something in his face made it clear he understood, instantly and completely, what had just happened in this backyard. "I didn't know," he said. "Nobody told me the commander was family." Gary tried to recover the way Gary always tried to recover, with volume. "Wait, hold on, you know each other?" Small world. But nobody was listening to Gary anymore, because Marcus had already turned to face him fully, and something had shifted in the geometry of the group, the way it does when the person everyone assumed was the least important in the room turns out to be the one everyone else has been trained, by instinct and rank, to defer to. "Sir," Marcus said, "and I want you to understand that in 11 years, I had never once heard anyone in that family address me with anything close to that word, with respect." Lieutenant Colonel Ashford commanded the task force that pulled 40 of our guys out of a collapsed compound under fire. She's the reason half my unit's fathers walked their daughters down the aisle. I don't know what you meant by that introduction, but I need you to understand who you're talking about. I could see my mother's face doing the thing it always did, when reality contradicted the family's carefully maintained fiction, a kind of flickering, like a television losing signal, unable to decide which picture to hold on to. Gary opened his mouth to say something and found, for possibly the first time in his adult life, that he had nothing. The internal ledger I'd been keeping for 11 years, the science fair trophy, the scholarship, the ribbon nobody looked at, tonight's introduction, didn't erase itself in that moment. It just, finally, had a witness who understood what it weighed. Marcus asked quietly if he could show something to the group, and I nodded because I understood by then that this wasn't about me anymore. It was about a young captain who needed the people he was marrying into to understand the shape of the world he actually lived in. He pulled up a photo on his phone, one I recognized instantly, a formation at Benning, a citation being read, my name on it in a font too small for anyone at this party to have ever bothered reading before tonight. "The Bronze Star with Valor," he said, "for the Fallujah extraction. I was there, sir, ma'am, I mean, Colonel." He was flustered now, and it was oddly the most human thing that had happened at this party all evening. Whitney, to her credit, was the first one to actually ask the real question. "Why didn't you ever tell us any of this?" Her voice had lost its performance, for once, replaced by something that sounded almost like hurt on my behalf. 11 years too late, but not, I noted, entirely worthless for that. "I did," I said, and I kept my voice level because I had learned a long time ago that calm carries further than anger ever does. "I wore the uniform to dinner. I told you about deployments. Nobody asked what any of it meant. It was easier to just let me be the failure than to find out I wasn't." Gary, finally finding his voice again, tried the last tool in his kit, deflection dressed as generosity. "Well, this is wonderful, actually. We're proud of you. We just didn't know." And I let him finish, because I wasn't there to humiliate him. I was there, I realized as the words left my mouth, to finally say the thing I'd swallowed at 100 dinner tables. You didn't know because you never asked, I said. You called me a failure in front of a room of strangers because it was easier than learning who I actually am. That's not a misunderstanding, Gary. That's 11 years of choosing not to look. Marcus stepped in then, not to rescue me. I didn't need rescuing, but because some part of him, the part trained by years under real command, understood that the moment needed an anchor. Colonel Ashford's task force is the reason I get to stand here and marry into this family at all, he said to the stunned semicircle of relatives. I'd think that's worth a toast, not a joke. Nobody laughed this time. Somebody, somewhere near the bar, actually started clapping, uncertain at first, and then less so, until my mother, eyes wet, was the one holding my hand and saying my name, my actual rank, for the first time in either of our lives, like she was trying it out to see if it fit. I won't pretend the rest of the night was some cinematic redemption. Gary found me by the dessert table an hour later, stiff and quieter than I'd ever heard him, and said the word sorry like it physically hurt to produce. I told him I appreciated it, because I did, in the narrow, unsentimental way you appreciate weather finally matching the forecast. I didn't hug him. I didn't need to. Some ledgers don't get zeroed out with one apology, they just, finally, get acknowledged as real. I flew back to base 4 days later, and life resumed its actual shape. Briefings, deployments, the quiet respect of people who'd never once needed a dog tag to know who I was. Priya asked how the party went, and I told her it went fine, because in the world I actually lived in, understatement was its own kind of honesty. Marcus and Whitney's wedding happened 8 months later. I attended in dress blues this time, ribbons and all. And Gary, to his credit, introduced me that day not as a failure but simply as my daughter, the Colonel. 3 words it had taken him 11 years and 1 Army Ranger to learn how to say. My mother calls more now, tentative calls, careful ones, the kind that ask about my work instead of assuming they already know its size. I answer them warmly enough, but I've stopped waiting for those calls to fix anything, because I learned a long time ago in a much harder classroom than my mother's kitchen table that closure isn't something other people hand you. It's something you build for yourself, brick by procedural brick, until the structure holds whether or not anyone else ever walks through the door. Gary still tells that story sometimes, at parties, to new people, except now he tells it differently. Now the punchline isn't that I was the failure. Now the punchline is that he was the one who almost never found out who I really was. They spent 11 years calling me the failure. Turns out I was just the only one in the room who never needed them to know my rank. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the quiet one in a family that only had room to celebrate one kind of success, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. You're not invisible, somebody's just been looking in the wrong direction.